guys, today I want to talk about the movie Into the Woods that I finally got to watch on Disney Plus recently. I was very excited about it because I'm a huge fan of musicals, but I've never actually watched the stage version, so I came in with no idea what to expect. I mean, I knew that it was a slightly darker take on fairy tales, and since I love every kind of fairy tale retelling, and I also love the cast, I went in really prepared to enjoy this movie, and I didn't, to be honest. I'm not sure whether it was the film format or the story in itself, but either I really didn't like the kind of message that the film ended up sending, or it was too rushed to be conveyed properly. Again, I'm not familiar with the stage version, so this is just me speculating, but I think maybe one of the problems was that the stage version was more on the side of moral ambiguity, to kind of subvert the whole classic good versus evil kind of fairy tale thing, but because the film was an hour shorter, I think they didn't really have time to explore this ambiguity. And also maybe because it's Disney, I felt like it was morally condemning certain behaviors rather than exploring them. A couple of things before I get started. First of all, there will be spoilers. I'm pretty much going to spoil the entire film, so if you haven't seen it and you may want to, maybe wait a bit till you watch this video. Also, there are so many different characters in the film, and I'm not going to be analyzing all of them in depth. First of all, because the video would be way too long, and also because the issues that I have with the film mainly concern the representation of some of its female characters, especially the representation of female sexuality. So yeah, I'm not gonna go on and on about Jack or whatever. I thought they were fine, really. I thought everyone, yeah. I'm not gonna talk about Jack, not gonna talk about the baker, so yeah, sorry about that. So without further ado, let's talk about Into the Woods. For those of you who haven't seen it, I'm just gonna read you an abridged version of the Wikipedia summary, because this is just how lazy 2020 has made me. So, Into the Woods is a 2014 American musical fantasy film inspired by the Grimm brothers' fairy tales of Little Red Riding Hood, Cinderella, Jack and the Beanstalk, and Rapunzel. The film is centered on a childless couple who set out to end a curse placed on them by a vengeful witch. Ultimately, the characters are forced to experience the unforeseen consequences of their actions. So something that is central to the movie is the idea of desire, of wish, and the fact that it is followed by either a certain form of disillusionment or of punishment. Like this brief summary points out, there's this idea of consequence that's very important, especially to the second act of the story. And this is exactly the sort of thing that I love, by the way. You take classic fairy tale characters who, in the Disney version at least, always get their happy ending, and you subvert our expectations by adding a darker, more realistic touch, basically saying that sometimes we wish for the wrong things, and there's this tragic tale that ensues, and everybody dies, and it is dark as fuck, and I love that. But the problem that I have with Into the Woods is that I couldn't help but feel that although it seems to explore very interesting themes such as female sexuality and toxic masculinity, I ended up interpreting its message as very conservative at the core. Every form of transgression it explores, such as infidelity or rejecting the path that society forces you into, is severely punished, if you're a woman, that is. And the very few people who do get to have a rather happy ending are either forced back into their traditional roles, or they've outgrown their essential desire for transgression, or they're men. So ultimately this promotes a classic return to the status quo and to the traditional order of things, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but yeah, I am saying that's a bad thing, so I'll just make my case and y'all can decide what you think of it. So one of the ways I think the film promotes the restoration of the status quo is by associating the characters' wishes with the idea of sin, of transgression of norms, rules, etc., and by having them punished for daring to try and fulfill them, disrupting the established order of things in the process. The first song of the film, I Wish, introduces the characters as well as their desires and ambitions. We have Cinderella and her evil stepsisters, who you can tell are evil because the narrator tells us they're evil, and also they're dressed kind of slutty. So at this early point of the movie, Cinderella's wish is to go to the festival, to overcome the limitations of her class. She's sick of scrubbing the floor, she's sick of being an obedient little slave, and she wants to rise from rags to riches, it would seem. Then we have Little Red Riding Hood, who's stealing sweets from the baker and his wife, pretending that it's for her grandma. So from the get-go, she's presented as a little bit deceptive, you know, a few lies here and there, and also she's a bit of a thief, but she's not really held accountable because she's a child. So her sweet tooth and lack of self-control don't really have any consequences because, again, she's a child. For now. So her wish is associated with hunger and sweet, tasty food, which can be associated with the sin of gluttony. And because we know that she will end up being eaten by the wolf later on, we can sort of guess that this freedom and lack of accountability will be lost by the end of her story. Then we have the baker and his wife, who appear as to be quite traditional characters. What they both wish for is a child, which is not sinful or transgressive in itself, but, you know, in order to fulfill that wish, they need to break the witch's curse. So they need to lie, steal, cut a poor girl's hair, etc. And yeah, so the first act of the film is kind of a journey, you know, into the woods. It's all about self-discovery, exploring the outside world, disobeying orders, transgressing societal boundaries, and trying to fulfill your wish and having to deal with the consequences of that, because unlike in fairy tales, a happy ending isn't always what you get. It's really all about these different characters' pursuit of happiness and the wrong turns they take in the process. So let's explore how the narrative treats these characters and how it rewards or punishes their wishes and desires, as well as the transgressive paths they take in order to fulfill them. I want to begin by looking at the character of Little Red Riding Hood. So, as I said, she's presented as an innocent, naive little girl, but she's also a bit of a brat, you know. She's singing about her granny, to whom she's supposed to bring the sweets and bread that she stole from the baker and his wife, and she carelessly says something like, last time I saw her, she was sick in bed, for all that I know, she's already dead. So she's not really going into the woods to see her grandmother, she's really going into the woods to explore and enjoy herself. Into the woods and home before dark, as she says. So, although she's presented as she's a very careless, carefree child, and she's a bit reckless, she is aware that she must be home before dark. You know, she's aware that there are rules, she's aware that there is a path from which she must not stray. Of course, at some point, she finds herself in some unusual part of the woods, and she meets Mr. Wolf. Now, about Mr. Wolf, I'm not sure whether he wears a wolf costume in the stage version, but in the film he's not disguised as a wolf, at all, not even a little bit. He's played by Johnny Depp, which gross, and yeah, he's clearly presented as a man. Although his name does convey a predatory dimension to his character, he's not presented as an actual wolf at all. In the fairy tale version, the wolf was always a symbol for predatory men that children should be aware of. The fact of being eaten in children's literature is very often a straightforward metaphor for rape, but in this film it's almost not a metaphor anymore. I mean, the sexual aspect of it is really highlighted. Let me just quote some of the lyrics of Mr. Wolf's song. He says, "Look at that flesh, pink and plump, hello little girl. Tender and fresh, not one lump, hello little girl. This one's especially lush, delicious." So, he tries to tempt her, to get her to stray from the path, but Little Red Riding Hood, she argues, she says she's not allowed. She says, "Mother said straight ahead, not to delay or be misled." So she resists him at first, but then Mr. Wolf tries to seduce her. He says, "Oh, but look at what you're ignoring. Hello, little girl, what's your rush? You're missing all the flowers, the sun won't set for hours, take your time." And so Little Red Riding Hood is tempted. She strays from the path, she disobeys her mother, she ignores her warnings, and she stops to get flowers for her grandmother. So this song clearly associates Mr. Wolf with a sexual predator. He directly contrasts the grandmother's old age with Little Red Riding Hood's youth. He says, think of those crisp aging bones than something fresh on the palate. So we can tell that her youth is at least part of the attraction here. So a little later on, Little Red Riding Hood sees the baker who's trying to steal her red cape because he needs her red cape. It's one of the items that he needs in order to break the curse. So he pretty much forcefully undresses her, but then she just screams like a fury, like a banshee, and yeah, he ends up giving it back to her. So this establishes the fact that Little Red Riding Hood, although she's very young, you know, she's not totally helpless. She has ways of resisting. She has ways of asserting herself. And although she hasn't, you know, she didn't do that with Mr. Wolf, she has no problem doing it with the baker. So maybe she trusts Mr. Wolf, or maybe she's kind of seduced by him, which makes me so uncomfortable. But after all, when the baker tries to warn her about wolves, you know, he's like, oh, be careful around here, there are wolves. And she's like, yeah, I'd rather a wolf than you any day. Be careful what you wish for, I guess. So yeah, she rejects the baker in a way she clearly doesn't reject the wolf. And she ignores once more the adult's warnings. She disobeys orders because she doesn't like to be told what to do. She's a child and she wants to have fun, and she rejects authority. And, you know, Little Red Riding Hood has always been a sort of cautionary tale, and I've always had issues with it because it sort of frames pedophilia as something that children can avoid if they behave. And as a consequence, it implies that children who do not behave kind of deserve it. And that's obviously wrong on so many levels, but at least this much was in the original tale, so I'm not blaming the movie for it. What I specifically blame the movie for is what followed. First of all, when you see Mr. Wolf dressed up as Little Red Riding Hood's granny, I got I got transphobic vibes from that because, as I've mentioned, Mr. Wolf isn't actually a wolf. He's clearly a man who's now dressed in the clothes of a woman he has just devoured. It's a very scary image. I mean, he's a man who uses a woman's clothes so as not to appear threatening, tricking a girl into trusting him so that he can then eat her and symbolically rape her. And I mean, I'm not saying the movie was trying to be transphobic necessarily, but I was really uncomfortable watching that because of the, you know, the obviously wrong and offensive stereotypes of trans women as male sexual predators. So already it really rubbed me the wrong way, no pun intended. And it could have easily been avoided if they had simply portrayed Mr. Wolf as an actual wolf rather than as a man. So that was the first thing that bothered me. Second thing that really bothered me about this adaptation of Little Red Riding Hood is the song that she sings after she's been rescued by the baker. She says, "I'm sorry, I should have known better." Really? So yeah, she's pretty much saying that she should have listened to her mother, and then she says, "Oh, but he seemed so nice." So she's pretty much blaming herself for trusting Mr. Wolf and then like letting herself be seduced by him and then being symbolically raped by him, which okay. Then she goes on to say, "He showed me things, many beautiful things that I hadn't thought to explore." So from Little Red Riding Hood's perspective, what she's just experienced doesn't seem to be only traumatic or 100% awful, at least. It seems to stand for a kind of sexual awakening, but she's a child and he's an adult, and this is a very, very weird take. I mean, if the actress playing Little Red Riding Hood had been older, maybe I could have bought it. Maybe it could have even been interesting, you know, but she was 12 at the time, so yeah. Anyway, she carries on and says, "And he made me feel excited, well, excited and scared. Well, he drew me close and he swallowed me down." And then you actually see her fall into some sort of rabbit hole as she's being sucked inside of him. And she says, "He showed her secrets that I never want to know, and I know things now, very valuable things that I hadn't known before." So this experience that, in my opinion, cannot be interpreted as anything else, as anything other than a symbolic rape, is associated with learning and growing, and I hate that. I really hate that, to be honest. I mean, I find it so weird, especially given how Mr. Wolf's earlier song made it clear that he was attracted to her youth and that he wanted to eat her, which virtually equated him with a pedophile. I mean, anyways, then she says, do not put your faith in a cape and hood, that they will not protect you the way that they should, and take extra care with stranger. So it's as though she's become wiser, she's more cautious now. There's this sort of transition from innocence to adulthood, a symbolic loss of childhood. She seems to have learned her lesson. Great. And then she says, and though scary is exciting, nice is different than good. So it's a classic cautionary tale, right? Even flowers have their dangers. Don't be tempted, don't let yourself be seduced. Don't have sex, kids? Is that what the song is saying? Don't have sex with grown men, children? Cause that's not sex. That's not sex, like, at all. Ugh. Anyways, she gives her cape to the baker in order to thank him. But it was also the cape that she associated with protection. But it's also the color of sin and of temptation / seduction. So she ends up keeping her, blue childish dress. So I don't know if that was her way of getting rid of anything that might tempt others. The song ends with the line, "Don't be scared, just be prepared. Isn't it nice to know a lot and a little bit not?" It's just so confusing. I mean, when you look at the context, right? The experience of being eaten by a grown man. Again, I say man because he's called Mr. Wolf, but he really is a man. So the experience of being eaten by a grown man cannot stand for anything but rape. If the actress had been a little bit older, I could have bought the ambiguity a little more. But she really is a child whose innocence is emphasized at the beginning of the movie through her soft spots for sweets. Or is it precisely that lack of self-control that is meant to be punished here? Really? I mean, and she's never the focus after that point in the story. She's never the focus. So just putting all this mess out there without really going back to it. I mean, the song personally triggered me because it established clear parallels with rape and pedophilia, and to turn it into a somewhat positive experience that makes you grow and makes you more adult, that was just really odd to me. So let's try and sort this mess out, or make an even bigger one. I don't know. She wished for food, for sweets, sweet, tasty food, which she got thanks to her charming, childish behavior. Then she was eaten, so it's a punishment of some sort, right? It's a punishment for her original wish / sin. I don't remember who calls her that, but at some point in the film, she's referred to as a hungry little girl. So if you extend the metaphor, the fact that being eaten pretty much equals rape. Consuming food, especially sweet, tasty, forbidden food, sort of symbolizes sex. So, according to that logic, she was asking for it. Yeah, she was asking for it. And then she apologizes for it. And, she's grown from the experience and she partly enjoyed it. And then it's never mentioned again. I'm really confused as to what kind of message they're conveying here. If I had watched this as a young girl who had been abused, I don't know how I would have felt. Is this a sexual awakening? Okay, but then why does Mr. Wolf seem so predatory and threatening and a grown man? Or they're saying that rape or abuse can be experienced by a child in a positive way? What in the actual fuck? Again, you're allowed to be controversial. One of my favorite novels is My Dark Vanessa, and it's pretty much Lolita, but from the girl's perspective, and it's all about her, at the beginning of the novel, she thinks that she actually enjoys what this older man is doing to her. But the film is all about... the book is all about her, realizing that this isn't sex, that this isn't love, and that this isn't okay. What I'm trying to say is that I usually like it when people try to portray rape in a less conventional, less stereotyped way. But if that's what you're doing, it has to be central to your story. You can't just establish like clear parallels with rape, then have your survivor character be like, I kind of hated it, but liked it at the same time, you know, and then never mention it again. Because Little Red Riding Hood never mentions the event again. I mean, we see her wearing the wolf skin around her shoulders instead of the red cape, and we know that she now wears a knife for protection, and she doesn't believe Jack when he tells her about giants. So, you know, they establish that she's no longer innocent, that she's no longer naive. But the event in itself is never mentioned again. And I just feel like if you're gonna address how confusing and ambiguous rape feels, you cannot rush it like that. I just found it to be very offensive. So this is pretty much when I started to dislike my experience of the movie as a viewer. I mean, I was kind of triggered by it, to be honest, and, you know, I was just thinking, well, the rest of the movie better be worth it. And, it wasn't. Let's talk a little bit about Cinderella. So, at the beginning of the movie, Cinderella is a very submissive character who has been obeying orders all her life. And she's just about to rebel. In the opening song, she says, father said be good, mother said be nice. So she's an obedient little girl, you know. She doesn't stray from the path that's been laid before her, which is to serve, to sacrifice her own desires for the sake of others. She's pretty much the embodiment of what a woman is supposed to be, right? But in the scene where she's helping her sisters get ready for the ball, you see her question this conditioning. She's like, what's the use of being good? What's the use of being nice? So she questions parental authority. She expresses her wish to go to the festival, to put her own desires first. So they set up her arc to be a kind of rebellion against this stereotypical female conditioning, and her finding out how to assert her own desires, how to transgress the limitations imposed on her by society because of her class and gender. So from the get-go, I am super into this character. So she goes to her mother's grave, which is symbolized by a willow tree, so you have this classic association of women in nature. And she gets this little glow-up moment, you know, she gets this super fancy golden dress and slippers, and her wish comes true. She goes to the festival, and the prince dances only with her until she slips away. And then you see her kind of question her own desires, because this is all very new and exciting, but also very scary for her. You know, she's not even sure she wants to go back to the festival on the following night, because it's a 3-day festival. Yeah, the first act of the story pretty much it all takes place in 3 days. Up till the second act, I really liked where her character was going. You know, she was kind of in crisis. She had a very beautiful song on the steps of the palace, and I also liked the fact that she left her shoe as a clue for the prince on purpose. You know, again, just a little bit more female agency. Nothing wrong with that. Her prince, oh yeah, her prince was definitely creepy though. I mean, he's literally chasing her, and I don't know what he would have done if he had found her and she did not want to marry him. I mean, if she's anything like Little Red Riding Hood, I'm sure she would have partly enjoyed it, but... Oh yeah, the prince. I'm gonna call him Chris Pine because there are two princes and it's gonna get confusing otherwise. So Chris Pine is kind of the embodiment... he's kind of the ultimate stereotype of toxic masculinity in this film. He has this incredible song called Agony, and it's pretty hilarious. I just really loved that commentary. I thought it was really well done. It was really entertaining. You just see the two princes ripping off the buttons of their shirts and competing with each other to know who's suffering the most from their romantic longing, and it was hilarious. Yeah, I have to say, if there's one thing that I really enjoyed about the movie, it was the how they revisited the Prince Charming trope. I thought it was pretty fun. Back to Cinderella. The prince ends up seeing her for for what she is, which is a dirty girl. And I'm not saying that in a weird way. She's literally called dirty throughout the entire movie. So he sees her for who she is, but he still wants to marry her. He still loves her because she keeps running away from him, and he's emotionally very immature, apparently. So, yeah, they get engaged, but not before Cinderella's cruel, slutty stepsisters are mutilated by their mother and blinded by birds. Which, fair enough. But the bird thing was pretty weird to me, though, because in this film, Cinderella is able to communicate with birds, and they're pretty much at her command throughout the film. So, did Cinderella just blind her mutilated stepsisters? I mean, wow, the film is going heavy on the whole punishment thing. So that's the end of Act 1 for Cinderella, but before we get into her character development in Act 2, we have to talk about other characters that are relevant to this video. Jack. Kidding. The baker and his wife. So, as I mentioned earlier, the baker and his wife start out as pretty traditional characters. They want to have a child, but they are cursed, and the whole story is kind of about them breaking the curse and getting ready to be parents at the same time by getting to learning how to trust one another. So let's talk a little bit about the curse. The witch tells them that the baker's mother was pregnant and developed a peculiar appetite. So the baker's mother had her husband, the baker's father, steal from the witch's garden, which left the witch feeling very upset. You know, she associates the robbery with a rape in the song, so make of that what you will. So the baker's father has sinned, and now he has to be punished, as you may have guessed by now. And the punishment is pretty it's pretty tough. The witch pretty much just steals their child, their daughter. She steals their baby, and makes everyone on the grounds barren, which is why the baker and his wife have been unable to have a child. So the witch tells the baker and his wife how to break the curse, which will fulfill their wish by giving them a child, and it will also fulfill her wish by giving her her youth and beauty back. What they have to do is pretty much go into the woods and find some random as fuck fairy tale items. And this is pretty much what the first act is all about. Maybe I should have started with that. Anyways, the baker tells his wife to stay home so that he can take care of it. And though I really appreciate the effort of the husband being like, "Oh no, darling, this is too dangerous. Stay home, and I'll go make this baby by myself." This is not how babies work. But you know, he's a very traditional husband figure, so he wants to do it on his own. He doesn't want his wife to help him, but she doesn't listen and helps him anyway. Wow, women are very disobedient in this movie. About the wife, note that her character does not have a name, so she's really just defined by her relationship to her husband, who is himself defined by his professional activity. I thought that was a pretty good commentary on how women are usually defined by their relationship to the men in their lives, whereas men are usually defined by what they do for a living. So I thought that was pretty good. From the beginning, I really liked the baker's wife's character. I thought she was very relatable, really authentic. You can tell that she's a very loving wife, you know, but it doesn't mean that she's perfect. Like, she's very curious about Cinderella's prince, Chris Pine. At some point, she tells Cinderella, when she sees her hiding in the woods, she tells Cinderella, you know, if the prince were looking for me, like, I wouldn't be hiding or running away. So, yeah, I thought it was cool to see a three-dimensional housewife character who, yes, loves her husband, yes, wants a baby with him, but who also notices other men, and who still thinks about the many other lives she may have led if she was allowed to be something other than just the baker's wife. I also really enjoyed how her relationship with her husband evolves throughout the first act. At first he's really trying to exclude her from the action, but then, you know, they realize that it takes two to have a child. They have this really cute song, and they realize that, you know, they're gonna have to work together as a couple. They're gonna have to trust each other, to lean on each other, to support each other, because that's what being parents is. So yeah, I thought that was really nice. It was a cute moment. So they work together, they find all the items, and they break the curse, and the baker's wife gets like 8 months pregnant immediately. And the witch gets her youth and stunning Meryl Streep beauty back. Speaking of the witch, I thought her character had a lot of potential. In Act 1, I really thought she was going to be super interesting. At the beginning, she presents herself as a wronged woman who's been robbed. raped. And she also wanted to have a child, like she wanted a baby, but in exchange for that she lost her youth and beauty. And it's sort of a classic female sacrifice. The idea that you can either be the young, beautiful, virginal woman or the, you know, or a mother, but you can't really embody both these female ideals at the same time, because the sole fact of being a mother robs you of your own womanhood. I also thought she kind of symbolized nature. Witches and women in general are frequently associated with nature, and I kind of liked this idea that she wasn't good or evil, you know. You take from her and she'll take from you, and you give something to her, she'll give something to you in return. So I liked how she was kind of neutral in that way. You also learn in Act 1 that the reason she sends the baker to break the curse is because she cannot touch any of the items herself. Basically, she cannot fulfill the quest herself, or it simply will not work. So I kind of liked that, because although she seems to have a lot of power, she doesn't seem to have a lot of agency, and I thought that was a very interesting paradox. Because she does appear to be a bit wicked at times, a bit cruel, but on the other hand, she's literally forced to manipulate others to act on her own desires, on her own destiny, because she's not allowed to act on it herself. I don't know, as a woman it kind of spoke to me. So yeah, she's cruel, yeah, she's wicked, maybe, but perhaps only because she is forced to use others to fulfill her desires, as she lacks the agency to act on it herself. So yeah, I thought this character was super interesting. It really addressed certain aspects of female identity, like the loss of social status you experience when society no longer deems you beautiful, and how that's related to motherhood. Also, as a mother, I thought she was a stereotype of the overbearing mother, and I really hope they were going to deconstruct that a little bit in Act 2, but yeah, they gave us, in terms of mother-daughter relationship, they really gave us nothing. Maybe it was better in the stage version, I don't know. But in the film it was just very poorly done. To give you a little bit of context, her daughter, the baby that she stole from the baker's father and mother, is in fact Rapunzel, who she's locked up in a tower for her entire life to protect her from the outside world. So Rapunzel, there's nothing to say about her really. She's pretty much defined by her hair and a nice sounding voice. She's a very submissive, obedient character at first, but then she rebels, she shows interest in the prince, and her mother punishes her by cutting her hair and banishing her to a swamp, or she just lies there in a way that really reminded me of 19th century Ophelia paintings. Anyway, her character was really rushed in the movie. I'm sure it was much better in the stage version, but again, I haven't seen it, so I don't know. Long story short, the not Chris Pine prince, yeah, the other prince, I'm just gonna call him not Chris Pine. The not Chris Pine prince, who has been blinded by the witch, finds her, rescues her, and, he was blind, but she heals him with her magic tears of love. Yeah, that's pretty much the end of Act 1, minus Jack, but who gives a fuck. So as you can tell, my only real problem with Act 1, and it was a pretty big one, was Little Red Riding Hood's story and the pretty transphobic representation of Mr. Wolf. But things really started to go to hell in Act 2. So what happens is that... fuck. I'm gonna have to talk about Jack for like 5 seconds. So... Jack is a little boy who sold his cow / best friend to the baker and his wife, because the baker and his wife needed the cow. It was one of the items that they needed to break the witch's curse. So he sells it to them in exchange for a few magic beans that the baker's father had stolen from the witch's garden. Now, Jack used the beans to go to Giantland and stole a bunch of shit from the giant, and yeah, giants plural, sorry, and even killed one of them. And the twist in Act 2 is pretty much that the curse has been reversed, everything that seemed wrong is right. Cinderella is marrying Chris Pine, Rapunzel is marrying not Chris Pine, the baker and his wife have become parents, and it really looks like a happily ever after moment. The narrator even says, "And so, with a kingdom filled with joy, those who deserved to were destined to live happily ever," and then... a lady giant whose husband Jack has murdered comes to terrify the kingdom and pretty much tells the main characters to bring Jack to her so that her husband can be avenged, or she'll just kill everybody. Side note, note the use of the word deserved when, the narrator said those who deserve to were destined to live happily ever. So the word deserve, it really implies that, these characters really don't deserve a happy ending and they're about to be severely punished. And I don't know, it just really underlines the whole punishment thing and the moral dimension of the film, which I really disliked. Back to the giant lady. And I really don't want to sound like I'm overthinking things simply because I enjoy being outraged, which I do, because it's intellectually stimulating, but this isn't therapy, so I'm not going to talk about that. But the representation of the female giant really bothered me. Honestly. Okay, it's just that the villain in Act 1 was Mr. Wolf, right? And as I've already said, as I've mentioned already, I thought it was pretty transphobic because it depicted a sexual predator who dresses up as a woman to get a young girl to trust him so that he can then eat her. And now in the second act, the main villain is a giant lady whose voice is distorted to sound more masculine, who is big and strong, and all the characters are like, oh, isn't that unusual, a giant lady. And she's depicted in a very dehumanizing way. You never see a clear shot of her face. And yeah, I just felt like it was a bit much, I wouldn't have necessarily associated her inherent monstrosity with the fact that she's associated with more masculine traits, but when you put it next to Mr. Wolf, it just doesn't look good to me. I don't know. Plus, to be honest, she wasn't a very strong villain objectively. And honestly, I don't know. Maybe Steven Universe represented giant women so well that it just ruined it for me. I'm ruined for the giants now. Anyway, the story has taken an unexpected turn. Everyone is lost, and they go back into the woods to find Jack and bring him to the giant, I guess. I don't know. The baker is already getting on my nerves because he's pretty much shaming his wife for not wanting to take care of their son 24/7, but they end up leaving their son with Little Red Riding Hood, who's also lost in the woods, because their plan is to separate and cover more grounds or save some time or whatever. The baker's wife goes her own way and meets Chris Pine again, who has just married Cinderella. And he tells her that she's so brave, because she's in the woods by herself and she's a woman, so he immediately tries to kiss her. And yeah, side note, I believe that the Prince Chris Pine and Mr. Wolf are played by the same actor in the play. So when I say kiss, I guess you could sort of interpret it as an assault in the play, maybe more than in the film, because he was really pushy in the film, but she did seem to be kind of into it. But I don't know, there's an ambiguity that's present because of this specific choice of casting. So anyways, the baker's wife says, "This is ridiculous, what am I doing here? I'm in the wrong story." And I really like that, because to me this is how you subvert a fairy tale. It's kind of like telling Cinderella, what, you thought you were special because he chased you and wanted to marry you when he barely knows you. Yeah, you know who does that? Fucked up people. And I also like the fact that the baker's wife wasn't necessarily fulfilled forever by the ultimate bliss of motherhood, She still has needs. She isn't necessarily ready to let her womanhood be erased by the fact that she's now a mother. So Chris Pine kisses her and then she sort of protests, but he kind of seduces her or assaults her, depending on your perspective, and he takes off the scarf that her husband, the baker, had given to her for protection. I wonder if this might be foreshadowing a punishment of some sort. So we move on to other characters, and by the time we go back to the baker's wife and Chris Pine, it's unclear whether or not they've actually fucked. But before Chris Pine leaves, he tells the baker's wife that, he'll never forget how brave she is or how alive she's made him feel. So he's pretty selfish about the encounter. And then she has a pretty awesome song. She expresses her frustration about being a mother and about being a housewife. and how maybe she wants more, and how she, you know, it's still unsure for her. Just because she's a mother doesn't mean that it's not necessarily the happy ending that she wanted. She sort of questions that, and I really liked that. So yeah, she questions that, but then ultimately she realizes that this experience really made it clear to her that what she really wants is to go back to her son and husband. She says, back to child, back to husband, back to life. No one lives in the woods. So it's clear that this was just a small mishap, you know. Sure, she strayed from the path of being the faithful, dutiful mother and wife. She strayed from the path that was expected of her for like 1 second, and then immediately dies. Like, dies. I'm not kidding. She literally cheats, sings, and then falls from the cliff, and they cut to a scene of Cinderella taking care of her baby. Can you tell why I feel like the film's use of punishment has heavy moral connotations? And it's not just saying cheating is bad, you know. Because Chris Pine does not die. It's saying cheating is bad if you're a woman. Especially if you're a woman, because as a man, you're an asshole, you're a prick, but as a woman, you must die. And given how severely Little Red Riding Hood was punished in Act 1 for being fucking hungry, yeah, female sexuality isn't portrayed as a positive thing in this universe. Or, you know, just being a woman and disobeying your mother, or falling in love and wanting to do something other than staying at home and taking care of babies. Anyway, the baker, Little Red Riding Hood, and the baby find Cinderella, who was upset because her mother's grave has been destroyed, and we learn that she had to dress up as her former self, you know, in her dirty clothes, in order to leave the palace, because she's not allowed to leave unescorted. So, yeah, she's pretty much still a prisoner who needs a disguise in order to escape or run away or do what she wants. Then they find Jack, who's wearing the scarf that the baker had given to his wife, which I guess Jack took from the wife's corpse? Jack, what the fuck is wrong with you? Anyway, he's like, where did you find this? And Jack is like, oh, shit. And so the baker finds out that his wife is dead, and it's a whole thing. It's actually not. He looks sad for like 5 seconds, and then he's fine. Then they start accusing each other, trying to find who's to blame for this whole mess, and they end up blaming the witch, who sings a fucking amazing song before sinking into the ground and also dying. So everyone starts to question their wish. They're like, Little Red Riding Hood is like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have strayed from the path, and Cinderella is like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have gone to the ball, you know. So again, the whole mess is associated with all these characters' wishes, their transgression from the path that was meant for them. The idea is that they're being punished, after all, right? So the baker comes really close to abandoning his child, but he decides to do better than his own father and to take care of his son and be a better man, and yeah, good for you, Baker. Cinderella has a little confrontation scene with her prince, Chris Pine, and he just tells her, I was raised to be charming, not sincere. Men are trash. Men are trash in this movie. But women are dead, so. So Cinderella tells him, my father's house was a nightmare, yours was a dream, now I want something in between. And yeah, they pretty much admit that they're in love with the fantasy of each other, but they don't belong together, so they break up. By now, everyone's plan is to trick the giant lady by using Jack as bait and then killing her. Then Little Red Riding Hood is like, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right to kill someone. Somebody, and Cinderella is like, oh, not somebody, a giant. And Little Red Riding Hood is like, a giant is a person. And I'm glad you said that, like, really, I'm glad you said that, Little Red Riding Hood, but why humanize the giant in the text if you're not actually gonna humanize her by, I don't know, showing one clear shot of her face, or just giving her a voice that isn't distorted to sound like inhuman? I I don't know, it was weird. I felt like they didn't really want the main characters to be too much of assholes, so they had to at least question that a little bit, the whole murder thing. So they had to bring up the fact that she's actually a person, but they didn't really want to commit to show us that by actually humanizing her, because it would actually make it weird that they would then have to kill her. So yeah, just give her a weird voice and never show her face. Meh. So, they sing a song to show that life is full of grey areas. They say wrong things, right thing, nothing is so clear. But yeah, it's all about moral ambiguity, right? They say people make mistakes, witches can be right, giants can be good. So it's like they're trying to blur the lines between good and evil, right and wrong, right? But ultimately, do they blur those lines or do they just underline them with a big red crayon? Because yeah, a woman who cheats and is then immediately killed off, a hungry little girl who disobeys orders and is then symbolically raped. I don't know, it seems like you have a pretty straightforward vision of what right and wrong is. I'm just not sure I like it so much. When you think about it, the only people who aren't punished in this story are the men. Like, I know you're a child, I'm sorry Jack, but what the hell is your punishment, you little shit? You came to a foreign country, you robbed the natives, killed a man, and you get away with it? You little fuck. Emily Blunt had to die because she kissed another man. Jesus, how is that fair? By the way, I think in the stage version, Rapunzel's character also dies. Like, she disobeys her mother and then she's crushed by the giant. And apparently her prince also cheats. So, another bitch who had it coming. Yeah, it's time to wrap this up because my voice is breaking and also I can't take it anymore. So they kill the giant, Little Red Riding Hood and Jack move in with the baker as kind of like adoptive children, along with Cinderella, who says that she will gladly help around the house because she enjoys cleaning at times. Look, I don't think there's anything wrong with being a housewife. I truly don't. I truly do enjoy cleaning at times. Like, this is... I get it, but like... the way it's done, having the baker's wife being punished because she kissed another man, and then having her replaced by the virtuous Cinderella, who is never sexualized and who rejected the prince for like a simpler, better life. I mean, and she's pretty much the only female character who survived this entire shit show. So that is saying something, you know. When all the other female characters disobey and are then killed or raped, it's not all that bad. Having the only female character who survived be like, yeah, you know, the whole princess thing, I'm not sure it's for me, so maybe I just want to go to your place and clean your house and take care of your babies. I mean, really? That's your reward? Like, come on. So yeah. In conclusion, the second act felt incredibly rushed. The transgressions were immediately followed by punishment. It just wasn't subtle at all, and it really highlighted the moral values that the film seemed to prone. Yeah, that's ultimately why I disliked the movie so much, I think. Again, this whole thing was just about the film version. I haven't seen the play. Maybe it's brilliant, maybe it doesn't feel like a lecture. I don't know how much the Disney dimension contributed to making all these fallen characters' tragic fate seem like a rightful punishment, but regardless, it is not a film that I would recommend unless maybe you're a huge fan of the play and you just want to see the songs. I don't know. Do your thing, but yeah, I hated it. I'm exhausted now, so yeah, that's gonna be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching and listening to me rant once again. I know that this was a very long one. Thank you so much if you made it this far. You truly are a hero. I hope you enjoyed it, and take care of yourself.